Now let's go ahead to set up a Nexus repository manager on an EC2 instance. Let's set up a Nexus repository manager on an EC2 instance on the AWS console. So I'm assuming you're logged in, so you need to log into your AWS console. We are going to be launching an EC2 instance and set up Nexus on this given EC2 instance. Now, for us to set up the configuration, I'll come back here in the Nexus Learning repository. I'm in the Nexus Learning repository. These are the installation. You come to the installation directory in this Nexus Learning repository. You open the installation directory and you find this shell script, Nexus installation.sh. This is a shell script that you can use to install Nexus. So you can use this shell script to install Nexus. Now, when you come back to our EC2 console, we have our Maven server from the previous module, which was stopped. We are going to be starting this server in the next couple of minutes, but let's first launch our Nexus server. So for us to launch our Nexus server, I'll click on launch instances. Now I'll call this server Nexus Learning Server, and I'll choose Amazon Linux. So you can use the Amazon. We'll be using Amazon Linux instance to run this server on. Now you can leave the configurations as this for the AMI type. We can select for the instance type. You can use T2 medium, so you can use T2 medium. For us to have a server which is actually very fast, you can use T2 medium. And then for the key pair, you can select your given key pair. So I have a key pair in my environment, so I'll choose the key pair which I have, one that key pair. So you also want to choose a key pair. Now we are going to click on edit, where we'll be editing some settings with respect to our given Nexus repository. Now you can assuming you have a different VPC, you can use your VPC that has been customized, but I'll be using the default VPC that already has a public subnet. The requirement is for this VPC to have a public subnet. I could as well come in and automatically select the public subnet if I want to be more specific, but you need to set up your Nexus in a public subnet just for simplicity or for understanding in this module. And then you also want to enable auto assign public IP, where you publicly you want to give the possibility for this Nexus server to have a public IP on creation. Now when you enable public IP, the next thing is for us to have the right security groups. So we are going to give the security group name Nexus Learning SG to signify Nexus Learning Security Group. So Nexus Learning SG. So I'll copy all of these and I'll replace in the description. We have Nexus Learning SG. Now you allow the default port 22 port open because we are going to be we'll do an SSH into the given Nexus server, and we will need to add one additional port, which is the port for the Nexus repository manager. Nexus repository manager runs on port 8081. So we'll be adding a security group rule. You click on add security group rule. Now there's the first security group here. There's the first security group rule here. TCP 22 on allowed to anyone, well, source anywhere, IPv4. The same thing, we also have security group 2. We'll be adding a security group rule 2, and then we use custom TCP. Now the most important thing which you must take note of is we are adding the port 8081. For you to verify this, you can come to your new tab. You can ask Nexus repository port. So you click on Nexus repository port. Maybe I should have put Nexus repository port number. Maybe I should put Nexus repository port number. So if you select Nexus repository port number, you see that once the repository manager is started, the application is listening on the configured IP address range and port. By default, any IP address and port 8081. So Nexus by default uses port 8081. So that's why in our security group here, we are insisting on port 8081 for the Nexus repository port. Now once you have your Nexus repository port configured here, you come to advanced details. Rather, you click on advanced details, you scroll down. When you scroll right down, you'll be required to put in a user data. And this user data is pretty straightforward. We come back to our Nexus Learning repository. This is the user data. If you're not sure, I'll come back to this data again. So if I'm in my Nexus Learning repository, once I'm in the Nexus Learning repo, I'll click on installations. Once I click installations, I'll now go to the Nexus installation.sh. Once I'm in the Nexus installation.sh, I'll just copy the raw file. You see, click here, you see copy raw file, and it shows copied. Once I copy the raw file, I'll come back to where I'm launching my EC2 instance, and I'll paste the configuration code. Again, this is the configuration code which you use to set up Nexus repository manager. Once you paste that, I'll go over this configuration again. Pretty straightforward. You start by giving the Nexus server a name, Nexus Learning Server, running on Amazon Linux 2023, and then the instance type t2.medium, using the right key pair which I have access to, and then using a public subnet in my default VPC. You might have another VPC which is also having a public subnet. You want to launch the Nexus server in a public subnet, and then you can come to security group. We created a new security group called Nexus Learning Security Group, and then we give that security group some configurations to have our first security group port 22, because we'll be able to SSH into the Nexus server, and then we also have port 8081 to be able to access the Nexus server on our console or on our web browser. And then of course the last configuration which we did, you click on advanced details, and you add the corresponding user data to install Nexus. This is the user data which we copied from our Nexus learning repository over here. So once you have all of these, you click on, again, we are using just one instance. These are the instance details, AMI, the instance t2.medium, and then a new security group with this particular volume. Once you have all of these configurations, you click on launch instance. Oh, we did not select the source type, so let me select source type anywhere, and I click on launch instance. Now you see successfully initiated launch of instance IDs. So let me click on this to get to the instance that has been launched. So this is the instance ID. This Nexus Learning Nexus Learning server. You can see it's in the pending state, T2 medium. This is the public IP address of the server. This is the private IP address. And to know more details, you can see security, the IAM rules, the inbound rules is connected to port. The security group actually is the Nexus Learning security group which you created. And if you scroll down, you see the ports that are open. You see port 22 open and port 8081 open for the inbound rule. And then for the outbound rule, we have the default outbound rule. So if you let's refresh and see. If you refresh, we will see that our instance is initializing. So while it's initializing, I can just check out some other configurations like the networking. We see the public IP, the private IP. Again, the user data which we use for this given server, this is the user data, the Nexus installation.sh. So once you click on the Nexus installation.sh, it will give you this script, which we just copy this script and pass as a user data. Now coming back here, I think our instance should be up and running. I'll refresh again. Once we have the instance initializing, or you can copy the public IP, you open a new tab. Again, you come to the instance, you copy the instance public IP, you open a new tab, you paste that IP, you type colon on the keyboard, and you specify port 8081. So again, you see here, they say by default, Nexus uses any IP address and port 8081. So for our case, any IP address will correspond to the public IP of the Nexus server upon creation, and then port 8081. So once you have this configuration, you hit enter, and then it will take you to, you need to continue to site. So once you continue to site, it takes some time for your Nexus server to come up. We have it Sonatype Nexus repository. For you to have this running, you must have had a 2-on-2 check here. So if I refresh this, I'll see a 2-on-2 check, meaning that all the installation commands have been executed. So you see Sonatype Nexus repository being configured or starting up to correspond to our Nexus server loading. So we have our Nexus server has been created and the Nexus server is loading. So let's set up our Nexus repository manager to be able to set up the necessary configurations for us storing artifacts in Nexus. Now, for us to get started, we have to log into or sign into our Nexus server. And to do that, you click on sign in. Once you click on sign in, we need to get the default, the admin password for our Nexus server. For us to sign in, we need to get the admin password for our Nexus server. So you copy this link, Well, let's first open our terminal. If you're using a MacBook, you can open your terminal. So I'll open my terminal on MacBook. I'll open my terminal. Let me clear my screen. And then I'll go to the directory that has my given. Let me make it bigger. I'll go to the directory that has my given key pair. My key pair is currently in my desktop directory. So if I do an ls, you see my key pair. This is my key pair here. I have other key pairs. You see my key pair. Now, once you come to the directory that has your key pair, you can also check pwd, a present working directory. This is the directory in which I am. This is the directory in which I am, and this directory contains my key pair. So with this directory having your key pair, you come back to your AWS console. You select the Nexus server. If it's not highlighted, you select it here. You highlight the Nexus server here, and then you click on connect. Once you click on connect, you see configurations. You could connect with EC2 instance connect. You could connect with sessions manager if you've set up SSM on this instance, which if not, you could connect with SSH client. So once you select SSH client, you can copy these two commands. You can copy the command gmod 400. You copy gmod 400 and you paste where you have your key pair. And then the second command, you copy SSH this, and then you select and you paste here in your console. You can do this on, if you're using MacBook, you can use your Mac terminal, or you're using Windows, you can use your Git bash terminal. Now, once you have this, all you need to do is you take yes, and then you give us access into our Nexus server. So our Nexus server is running on Amazon Linux 2023. We now just need to get the administrative password for our Nexus server for us to be able to log in the first time. So for us to do that, we come back to our Nexus. This is our Nexus. You highlight this, you copy this. Remember, we got this. When you click on sign in, you will be required to get this password. So I'll copy this. Once I copy. Once I come back to my Nexus server, I'll type the command sudo cat, and then I'll paste the link. So again, I copy this link from our Nexus repository. I come to my Nexus server and I do sudo cat and I paste the link. Once you do this, you hit enter, and now it will give you the default password for your Nexus repository manager. It gives you the default password for your Nexus repository manager, and that default password, it starts here right up to this point, or you can start here and copy right up to this point. This will be your own. You can, once you hit the command, you have your own password. So you can copy the password, you highlight the password and you copy. And then for the login, you give the username admin, and for the password, you paste the password. You give the username admin and you paste this password. Again, this password is collected once we do the sudo cat opt Nexus work, and we get the Nexus admin password. So once you get the Nexus admin password, you click on sign in, and it should take you to your Nexus server. Now, we need to complete these setup steps. So they say this wizard will help you complete required setup tasks. So you take next. For the password, just give admin, since we don't want to have issues with passwords. So just give the password. The new password should be admin, lowercase. They must match both for the new and the old password. So they must match both in both cases where you need to confirm. Now, once you do that, you take next. And when you select next, we don't want anyone to anonymously access our Nexus server. That's why we are going to select disable anonymous access. We'll select disable anonymous access, ensuring that no random individual will have access to our Nexus server. Once you disable anonymous access, you take next. And then once you take next, the setup tasks have been completed. Enjoy using Nexus repository manager. Enjoy using Nexus repository manager. Once you configure that, the last thing, you click on finish, and when you finish, this is what the Nexus dashboard looks like. Welcome, usage, 100,000 threshold, last 24 unique logins, no logins, and stuff. So you can have the summary of all your given artifacts here. You can browse based on different projects. You have browse assets and components. We have Maven Central, Maven Public, Java releases, Java snapshots, Nugget groups, Nugget hosted, Nugget.org proxy. These are the different repositories that have been created. These are different uploads into the server. You come to settings if you want to create your own repository, and under settings you see repositories. You can have repositories here. You click on repositories. These are existing repositories which are in the Nexus server by default. These are existing Nexus repository on the Nexus server by default. So we are going to create our own repository in the project, and we are going to call this repository, well, we are creating this repository for Maven, so we can select Maven group. We call this repository, we give the name Java web app repository. We give the name Java web app repository. Now the version policy, we don't want to allow just release. This means we want to be able to store. They are asking what type of artifacts do these repositories store. We don't want to store just releases. We want to store both releases and snapshots. So we'll select mixed. And then when you come down here, member repositories, you can enable for us to store releases. You can enable for us to store snapshots. You can enable for us to store Maven Central, as well as you can enable for us to store Maven Public. So these are the basic steps. First, you give the name Java Web App Repository. You enable the version policy to mixed, and then you later on move all the available member repositories into these members. Once you've put these basic configurations, you click on create repository, and when you click on create repository, you will now see the repository Java web app repo running on our Nexus server. This is repository URL 18.this/8081/repository/java. So basically what this means is if you open this link in a new tab, you should be able to access this given repository. So you see the Java web app repository. This Maven 2 group repository is not directly browsable in this URL. Please, well, this basically gives you access to this given repository. Now, for us to do further configurations, let's go ahead to, well, let me save this. For us to do further configurations, let's go ahead to start our Maven server. So I'll come back to my EC2 dashboard, and then I'll start the Maven server from the previous exercise. If you don't have a Maven server, you can come back to this learning repository. You look at the Maven install steps. This is a README file containing all the steps which you can set up Maven in a given on a given EC2 instance. So you get the installation steps here, and then you spin up a Maven server if you do not have a Maven server. Now, based on this configuration, I'll come back here. I already have a Maven server from the previous lesson, so I'll search for Maven. You see I have the Maven server. The Maven server is stopped because on the previous exercise we stopped the server. So all I need to do is to select the server, and then I come to instance state, and I click on start instance. Once you refresh, you have the instance public IP and the private IP. So let's go ahead to connect. You can connect to the instance, but before connecting to the instance, remember from the previous module, if you come back to my repo, Devops with my repo, you come to repositories. We created a practice Maven learning. This is a practice Maven learning repository which we created. If you come to our VS Code, this is a repository. We cloned the original Maven learning repository, and then now we clone this. We created our own repository, practice Maven learning repository, in our local, and we updated it in our Maven learning folder. So with these configurations, we actually had our Maven server created. We can connect to our Maven server. So let me go to EC2 instance connect. Let me go to EC2 instance connect. I'll copy this. We no longer need the session with our Nexus server. We've already gotten the admin. So I'll exit this. The session is already closed. Let me clear. This is a setup configuration for the Maven server. So I'll take yes, and then I should log into the Maven server. For us to confirm, once it's logged in, You can do an ls. If you do an ls, you see practice maven learning. Remember, we cloned this. Let me see if we still have history of all our commands which we did previously. This is the set of commands which we executed in our maven server. We just did a clone. We did a git clone to get the maven learning server from the respective repository. We seeded into it, sudo yum install tree, and all of that. So if you don't have the instance, you set up the instance, and then you access the necessary instance configuration here in our practice maven learning repo. Once you have access to your server, if you run maven deploy, you run all the previous commands. So previous build, failure, scanning for projects, memory disk. You specified, oh, we are not in the necessary directory. So let me cd to our practice maven. I'll clear. If I do pwd, I'm in the home EC2 user practice maven learning. I'll cd to Java, where we have our application code. If I do an ls, I'll see the src folder, as well as if I do a tree, we install tree in our maven server. If I do a tree, I will see the necessary configuration, the source, the main, and stuff. So with this, I'll run the maven deploy in our current directory, which is the directory content. So let me do a pwd. You see we are currently in the home EC2 user practice maven learning Java code. Now, while we're in this directory, we'll do a maven deploy. So it's running the build. It shouldn't take long because we already did the necessary builds from our previous exercise. So it runs all the respective maven commands, the test, validate, package, verify, all the necessary maven commands. It runs in this given maven deploy step. So once you run maven deploy, you'll see it's trying to deploy to a given Nexus repository on 172.31.19.50.80.81 repository on the Java web app repository. But we do not have this repository configured, and it is looking for this repository in the home EC2 user.m2 Nexus repository and all the like. So the configuration which we are going to be doing in our next video is for us to set up the configurations for Nexus. So let's go to the next video to set up the configurations for Nexus.